You know, a constitution isn't just some dusty old document. It's the fundamental rule book for an entire country. But what happens when the government decides it's time to change those rules? Well, in Zambia, a really controversial proposal called Bill 7 brought this question to a boiling point, and it sparked this high-stakes showdown over the future of the country's democracy.
And that really gets to the heart of it, right? How does a country go about changing its most basic law? Is it just a matter of getting a majority vote in parliament? Or does changing the very foundation of the state require something, well, something more, like the voice and the will of the people themselves? In Zambia, this wasn't just some academic debate. It became the central battleground over who truly owns the country's future. Is it the people or is it the politician? And believe me, this fight went all the way to the top. In a pretty stunning decision, Zambia's constitutional court stepped in and just slammed the brakes on the whole thing. And the reason? It was simple but so profound. The way the government went about it was just wrong. It was missing the one ingredient a constitutional change absolutely cannot do without: legitimacy. So how on earth did it get to this point?
Okay, so let's get into the weeds a bit. To really understand why this blew up, we have to look at what Bill 7 was actually trying to do. And listen, this wasn't just some minor edit. This was a massive overhaul of Zambia's entire political landscape.
The biggest, most eye-popping change was this number right here, 211. The bill wanted to add a staggering 55 new seats to Parliament. That's a jump of more than a third. Just think about that. That single change would completely redraw the political map of the country.
But hold on, it wasn't just about adding more politicians. The bill was really trying to rewrite the entire rulebook. I mean, look at this list. It's a whole package of huge shifts. By-elections? Nope, gone. The president? He gets to appoint more of his own MPs. And Parliament itself would basically be shut down right before an election. Any one of these is a big deal on its own, but you put them all together, you're looking at a seismic shift in how power actually works in Zambia.
Now, a key part of how the government sold this whole thing was this new electoral system. The idea, they said, was to guarantee seats for women, for young people, and for people with disabilities, groups that are often left out. So on paper, it was all framed as this big, progressive step towards a more inclusive parliament.
And this is where things get really interesting. You have to understand why these changes caused such an absolute firestorm. It all boils down to two completely opposite ways of looking at the bill's true purpose. Was this a genuine attempt to make things fairer, or was it a calculated move to lock in a political advantage?
So on one side, you have the government's official story. They pitched the bill as this great democratic leap forward, bringing government closer to the people, empowering marginalized groups. But on the other side, the critics were telling a completely different story. They were using words like power grab, a cancerous bill, even a structural instrument designed not to help democracy, but to make sure the ruling party could never lose.
So you might be asking, where did critics get this idea that it was a power grab? Well, they pointed to evidence just like this. This table, which reportedly came from an internal document from the ruling UPND party, kinda lays out the math. As you can see, with the current system, they've got a decent majority over their main rivals, the PF. But then look at the projection with 211 seats. Their majority doesn't just get bigger, it becomes absolutely commanding. For critics, this didn't look like a coincidence. It looked like the whole point of the exercise.
So how exactly would this structural rigging work? Well, critics started connecting the dots. First, they alleged the new constituencies were being carved out mostly in the ruling party's strongholds. Then, the new special seats and getting rid of by-elections would protect them if their popularity ever dipped. Add in a bunch more development money to hand out in these new, safe seats, and you get what they called a vote-to-seats multiplier. Basically, a system engineered to turn a simple majority of votes into an unbreakable grip on power. So, you've got this massive political standoff, the country's at a stalemate, the temperature's just soaring, and the whole fight lands right in the lap of the Constitutional Court. And what they did next was, well, it was a bombshell.
And here's the really brilliant part. The court didn't even get into the weeds of whether the bill was a good idea or a power grab. Nope. They focused on something way more fundamental: the process. The judges basically said there was no proof of any real, widespread conversation with the Zambian public. The whole thing, they declared, was not people-driven. And when you're talking about the Constitution, that is a fatal flaw. And the court didn't just say no, they actually laid out a crystal-clear roadmap for how to do it the right way. They defined this three-step process for any future attempts. 1. Make sure it starts with the public will.
2. Let an independent group of experts manage it. And 3. Go out and have wide consultations to get the public's consent right from the very beginning.
This one quote from the judgment, it really says it all. The court powerfully restated a core principle of democracy. The Constitution belongs to the people, not just to whichever politicians happen to be in power. Any attempt to change it has to start with them, and it has to end with them, period.
So, this ruling stopped Bill 7 dead in its tracks. But, this story is far from over. It brings us to the really critical question of what all this means for Zambia's future, especially with a huge general election looming in 2026.
What this ruling really did was hand a playbook directly to the public. It empowered citizen groups to become the guardians of the Constitution. Now they have the full backing of the law to demand transparency, like, hey, release the data behind those new constituency maps, and to get citizens mobilized to make sure that the next time this happens, the process is truly, genuinely people-driven from the start.
Ultimately, this whole standoff over Bill 7 in Zambia forces all of us to think about a really fundamental question of democracy itself. When it's time to rewrite a nation's most sacred rules, who should be holding the pen? The politicians who are elected for a term, or the people they're supposed to serve? Zambia's answer to that question is going to define its path for years to come.